All right. It's good to see you, Tim.
Here we go.
We are here for our second of what we hope to be many installments of a series of men power and the search for a healthy masculine. My name is Dr. Keith Merron. This is Tim Kelley, and we are switching roles. Last time we did this, Tim interviewed me and I interviewed him. But of course, the way we're going to do this is we're going to be exploring back and forth.
We're all over the place. So.
Or that too.
It'd be easy to forget who's interviewing whom after a while. So.
I know. But hopefully this will have a theme, and we actually have a plan for this. We want to talk about purpose. It is a subject that my friend and colleague Tim is an expert, a world expert in that area, having written the book True Purpose, which is a popular and profound book in understanding the nature of purpose and what does it take to find it. And I'm going to be interviewing Tim on that subject, and we're going to be riffing off of that subject to explore men, purpose, healthy masculine, and see where that goes from here. I am Dr. Keith Merron. I am part of the partnership, Tim and Keith. We do a workshop on Sword and Scepter, which we'll talk about later. Right now, we want to talk about true purpose. So there's a lot, Tim, as you know.
There is.
Everywhere I go, somebody says to me, I want to find my purpose. And that is particularly happening the past 20 years, give or take.
It's really amped up a lot. It's been termed a mega trend.
There's no surprise, but I want to understand from your perspective why that is. It's been around for a long time. I mean, the Greeks, Aristotle and Plato talked about the meaning. I think there was a term, I can't remember what the heck it is, some Greek term, ariknos something, that has to do with fulfillment. It's been around.
Sounds like spiders, but yeah.
It does sound like it. I can't get the right word. It's been around for 3,000 years or so since they were talking about it, but it's growing in popularity. Why is it so popular in your mind?
Yeah, there's a phenomenon happening. The reasons aren't entirely clear, but one of the things that's going on is the younger generations that are popping out now and coming of age seem to have been more aggressive about purpose younger than the older generations were. There was sort of this general feeling of that you worked hard and earned money, and then at the point that you made it or retired or something like that, that bought you the opportunity to either take it easy and go fishing or pursue your purpose in some more direct way. But it wasn't expected that that would happen right away. You had to sort of defer gratification and do your purpose later after you earned the right to do that by being successful at work. These younger folks, the Gen Ys and the Zs, and now they get an alpha or something that's coming out. These younger ones seem to be more aggressive about that much earlier. They want to manifest their purpose in their first job, and they will walk away from a job if it's not aligned with their purpose, they don't like the values or anything like that, even if they don't have another one lined up. And I have watched people do this, including my own son, just say, you know what? I don't really like how these guys, I'm not sure my purpose and their purpose line. I'm quitting. And no 2 weeks notice, just bye.
Yeah.
The older generations, the baby boomers and prior ones, they are hitting an age where purpose naturally becomes more of an issue. And this question of legacy and fulfillment, how much time do I have left? What do I want to do with the precious time that remains to me? And many of them, not all of them, many of them have been successful and climbed their way up Maslow's hierarchy to the higher levels where purpose is more of an issue.
Yeah.
So it seems between those two phenomena that it's a perfect storm.
Got it. Or wonderful opportunity, depending on how you look at it. But it's well, you didn't mean it as a storm in the way in which it's typically thought of, but it's a perfect confluence. So the older generation into purpose, younger generation now more into purpose. But I understand why the older generation would be more into purpose. Why is the younger generation more into it now?
No one knows.
Well, I've gone to the Oracle.
In some cases, it could be because they started out a little higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
To the extent that you're not dealing with a world war or famine or all these other stuff, as many other generations were at some point in their youth, teens, 20s, right, and trying to overcome that, and then feeling grateful just to be alive and have a job, to the extent that folks are, feeling a little more privileged, doing a little bit better,
Yeah.
then those issues may come up earlier. The other reason for its popularity is that there's more evidence about why it's a really good idea. There's always been this sort of inkling, but people started doing research. And
Yeah.
now there's all this stuff being published showing that if you know your purpose, you're likely to live longer for a variety of reasons. You're less likely to get dementia. You're likely to earn more money. You're likely to have better sex. There's just, I mean, I'm kind of shocked someone did research on that, but they did. Um, and the same for organizations. It's now also become very popular in business because of conscious capitalism and B team and B corps and all these other sorts of things. So people are getting exposed to purpose in the workplace
Yeah.
by their organizations finding
Yeah.
the organizational purpose and encouraging the employees to find theirs as well. And that has a huge string of benefits for the organizations and why they're more successful than their peers. And so all of those things seem to be working together. And that curve, that upward curve of interest in purpose doesn't seem to be slowing down. Also popular culture, movies like Megamind, which is an animated film, all about purpose, right? Soul, very much about purpose. So
Yeah.
there's just this, it's in some ways self-reinforcing the
Yeah, I think
interest in it.
so. I mean, a lot of the baby boomers, and I'm going to just reinforce a couple things I heard. A lot of the baby boomers are generally, on average, more self-aware
Mhm.
than the prior generations. Psychology came to the forefront and people studied it and wanted to better themselves. And so those are the parents of some of these younger folks. And I think that's one of the things you're keying on. Another thing you just mentioned very quickly about privilege, but I would just emphasize that a little more, which is our generation, the baby boomers and slightly younger, I think are the wealthiest generation on the planet,
Mhm.
which means our kids grew up on average with more wealth. Now, I'm not talking about
This is
working
by no
class.
means a universal experience,
It
however
is not
common.
any means, but we're
Yeah.
talking about a general trend in
Yeah.
society.
Mhm.
And so with that wealth, the kids grew up, I think, somewhat entitled,
Mhm.
somewhat expecting the world comes.
Assuming some of these lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy are going to be handled and
Yeah.
shooting for the higher level ones sooner.
Yeah, yeah. And so they'll go into the job and go, I want to be fulfilled.
Yep.
And they're used to that. They're not used to necessarily get a job or we're in trouble kind of
Mhm.
mentality. At least again, the most of the population, there's still a lot of that don't. So I think a combination of those, while we may not know it explains it, whether it is true or not, it is certainly growing in its popularity. So just tell me a little bit about when you say the word purpose, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. So dictionary wise, purpose just really means an aim or a goal. Like it could be anything, right? What's our purpose in recording this video? What's the purpose in buying this car? Those are all perfectly legitimate uses of the term.
Hmm.
However, in this context, we're talking about a life purpose as opposed to a purpose of something of smaller scale. And a life purpose to me is the answer to the question, why am I here? And some people feel that question has an inherent answer and some don't. I don't care. Either way, a good answer to that question is someone's life purpose.
Got it. And so we're talking about men power, healthy
Sure.
masculine.
Yep.
Depending upon your gender or if you're gender fluid, it may be different, but we're going to talk about men here for a little bit.
Yeah. And
And
some of this stuff applies much more to women than it used to because women are far more likely to go out and try to, make their way in the world and create a name for themselves and this sort of thing. So then many of these things apply.
or we could say that the women and men, the roles are not as prescribed as they used to be. And so the question, what do I want?
Mhm.
What is true for me is not a question that was as asked 200 years ago as it is asked now. The cultural definitions and expectations really loomed large. We're much more free as a species from that.
That's right.
Never
And
before.
both men and women were stuck in much more predefined roles, and the vast majority of them dealing with survival level stuff without much opportunity to
Yeah.
deal with purpose.
It's kind of one of the reasons why I like living in this day and age rather than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
I like the
I'd rather be doing this than subsistence farming.
yeah, me too. So the freedom that we get is clearly meaningful. But why is it particularly important for men?
So the idea, and this is something you and I know from the men's tribe we co-founded and from the Sword and Scepter workshop, that the idea of purposeful work in particular is key to the male psyche. And I want to read something from a great book called The Wonder of Boys. Just a quote, and this is talking about giving boys important work. This is all guidelines for how to raise a healthy human being who's male.
Okay, you actually planned this moment, didn't you?
This moment, yes,
This moment.
I had to go dig the book out of my Sword and Scepter box
Okay,
and
got it.
find the page before this call. So this moment was planned.
This moment is a little scripted. The rest of it is going
Little
to be
script. Well, it's written in a book. It's pretty scripted.
okay.
So an essential element of happy boyhood and happy manhood is the love of work. Not all work, but especially those few and important tasks through which boy and man learn intimacy with others, physical and mental maturity, self-confidence, and the ways of the world. And I would go beyond that to say that work which creates a positive impact on the world that I can look at and say, see what I have done, see how I have helped my tribe, see how I have helped my planet, see how I have helped humanity. This is my contribution.
Hmm.
And without that, I run the risk of dying unfulfilled
Hmm.
and looking back at my life and saying, well, I sold all these stocks or these cars, or whatever it was I spent my time
I
doing,
built
right?
cement.
Insured companies against, floods or whatever. And in my last days and years, looking back on that, the value of what I have done may be judged very differently than the
Mhm.
value I assigned to it while I was doing it.
Mhm.
And so the greater the contribution I've made, the more impact I've had, positive impact I've had on others, the more likely I am at the end to have a better deathbed experience. So now that's my game. I'm playing for that end game. But
Right.
even before then, all through, right, there's this thing that happens to men as a midlife crisis. Women have a different version of a midlife crisis from what I can tell. But the male version of the midlife crisis is this reevaluation of everything I have done up until now against a different metric than I used when trying to do it.
Yeah.
And those metrics for the young man, the metric is achievement, right? Did I get the bonus? Did I achieve the goal? Did I launch the company? Did I get the product out on time? Did I build the building, right? So I can see the work product and feel a sense of achievement. But then somewhere between like 35 and 60 in there somewhere comes a point where the meter changes and it's
Yeah.
no longer an achievement metric. It's now a fulfillment metric. Do I feel fulfilled by the stuff I do? And often the stuff that satisfied the achievement metric fails the fulfillment metric. And
Yeah.
that's what we call a midlife crisis.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense to me. I I think a lot of what happens, and I to some extent I fell into this, although not fully. My work has been very, very purposeful for 40 years. But there's a certain sense of being the good provider and being the good producer.
Hmm?
And if that's the the cultural imprint that I grew up under, then achieving becomes defined in that way.
Right.
So I fall into it, making good money, climbing the ladder, being better than
Right.
what
Got the house, kids got the braces, kids going to college,
I
wife
lived
has a
life,
nice
and I
dress.
was dutiful, but then I'm not necessarily fulfilled or satisfied.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it does start to happen. And I remember when I was 50 or something, I was looking at my own version of a midlife crisis. It wasn't a crisis, but it was a wondering. I picked up a book. It was called Death of a Hero, Birth of a Soul.
Mm,
And that title, the book, not so great, but the
right,
title really caught me because I think it's exactly what you're talking about.
right, right. Yeah. And so the a lot of my compatriots who also do purpose coaching and consulting and write books about purpose sort of preach about purpose as this be all and end all, and I consistently argue with them. It's not a be all end all. Purpose is a strategy for meeting high level Maslow's hierarchy needs.
Yeah,
Purpose is a strategy for experiencing fulfillment.
yeah,
Not everyone needs that help. There are certain jobs that are inherently very fulfilling. I understand farmers often feel very fulfilled, right? I found moving furniture to be very fulfilling when I was 21 years old. Um, People in indigenous societies often feel very fulfilled performing the traditional rituals and their traditional roles, much more than we might imagine in our society, apparently. Um, so one who feels very fulfilled will have little appetite for purpose,
yes.
right? Because purpose is a solution to a problem they don't have.
I suppose in some sense we'd have to double click on fulfilled a little bit. It depends on what that means, because
Mhm.
it could be a fulfilled on the ego plane, and it could be fulfilled on the soul plane.
Well, let's
Those
get
are
into that for just a moment, because there's been some very interesting studies in happiness.
yeah,
And so if you double click on happiness and break it down, there's different forms of happiness. There's excitement, joy, pleasure,
right,
right?
exactly.
Fulfillment has more to do with a sense of meaning, right?
Okay.
That I feel a high degree of meaning associated with things I am doing or things I have done or the impact of the things I have done.
Hmm.
And the difference between that one and the joy, passion, excitement, pleasure stuff is the other stuff is very short-lived,
Mhm.
right? So if you think about the pleasure associated with a good meal or good sex, after the experience is over, it tails off pretty quickly.
I know I have a chocolate chip ice cream. During the period of time that I'm eating it, I'm loving the taste of it.
And
Uh,
probably for the next minute or so
I
afterwards.
even two maybe.
Yeah.
The dopamine is nice and activated, and I go, "Oh God, that was good."
Mhm.
5 minutes later, the experience is gone, and
It's
what
gone.
I'm left with is a little bit of heaviness and
Mhm.
the awareness of, "Damn, I just did all that for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes of pleasure."
Right.
If you eat slowly, it's 15
That's right.
minutes of pleasure.
But if
Yeah,
you make a meaningful contribution to someone else's life that has a lasting impact, that's a gift that keeps on giving, right? The positive experience associated with that can last for years.
and are you equating that with purpose? Because
Yes, I am in a certain sense, um, which is that purpose, as I said, could be any goal, right? My purpose could be to die with the most toys.
that
I can declare that to be my purpose, and that would be true, right? Now, some people would argue that and say, well, you have an inherent purpose, and that isn't it. Yeah, I don't want to get into that debate in this context right now. But so, assuming that I can choose any purpose I want, which some people believe, a minority of people, but some people believe, um, different purposes will provide differing levels of fulfillment. And what seems to be the case is that there's kind of two factors that cause the fulfillment of a purpose to actually create an experience of fulfillment. One is if it causes me to grow and develop as a result of doing it.
Mhm.
And the other is if it has a positive impact on other human beings or animals or society, their environment or something like that, a positive benefit way beyond me.
Yes.
And those two factors, I had to grow and evolve and become a better version of myself in order to do it. And it had this significant positive impact on others, are what create the experience of fulfillment, from what I can tell.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it's part of the reason why I think, you know, when somebody's depressed, you can do a lot of work to try to help them figure out what the sadness is,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
you could say, I'd like you to go to this old folks home and help out these people.
Yeah, sing a song
Like, or
to
go
them.
Or go to the
Go to the soup kitchen.
soup kitchen, right, exactly. I was thinking of soup line, and help out for a day and
Mhm.
see what happens to your depression. And more often than not, it just, at least for a while, disappears because there's something.
Right. Now that may not touch underlying psychological or biological issues that may also need to be addressed, but it can go a lot further than you would think.
Because of the experience of fulfillment is appreciably
Well,
different.
and I'll give you a good example of this. In 12-step programs, people, after they've been at it a while, typically become a sponsor and mentor others who are earlier in their recovery journey.
Yeah.
And through that experience, for one thing, they now have to live up to the hype, right? Because they're modeling it for someone else.
I better keep.
I got to get my act together here, and right. But the other thing is the act of helping someone else climb up out of that pit is deeply fulfilling for them and cements their identity as this purposeful person who's helping others, as opposed to this broken individual who's trying to get back into society's good graces.
Yeah. So we're not going to get into in any deep way how do you find your purpose? That's
No.
read Tim's book, or read other books on the subject, and follow the guidance in those books.
Mhm.
Reading in and of itself won't necessarily get you there,
No,
but
one would have to do the exercises as well.
I think
And I have to say, a little warning to the reader, many books on purpose do not contain any exercises, which I was quite shocked to see.
they're touting the value of it. They're touting the value of it and the meaning of it, but they're not saying, and here's how to get
Right.
there.
And look at this
So,
purposeful person. Look at this purposeful person. Aren't their lives great?
so we're not going to be able to give away the whole
Yeah.
book. If you could boil it down to, I don't know if you've been asked this question before, but if you can boil it down to its absolute essence and say, okay, you want the essential thought about how to find one's purpose, where would I look? How would I think about finding my purpose?
My preferred method, which is not the most common method, my preferred method is to say the answer is already within you.
Mm-hmm.
It is unconscious, and it is protected by fear.
Yeah.
Fear of what would happen if you actually found your purpose and tried to pursue it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's way over 99% of people. That's the internal arrangement.
So I'd have to clear out the fear.
So you have to clear the fear,
Yeah.
and then go into the unconscious to get the purpose to arise once the fear is cleared.
Or clear enough, because we may not be, but once it's clear out of the way enough,
You can get it pretty clear. So.
Forever clear, or clear enough to look.
Oh no, clear enough, long enough to get the purpose to show up.
Okay.
Only needed to be clear for about 15 minutes.
Okay, because if you have the answer how to clear my fears, I'm talking about that.
Sorry, don't have the permanent fear clearing method at my disposal.
All right. So this gets to something that I think we've talked about a little bit. I've often had the thought of it.
Mhm.
Whereas so we're talking about, I mentioned ego versus soul.
Mhm.
That's a shorthand for, in this life, there are things that I try to produce. And if I do that, I'm better person, better husband, better father, better whatever. That's kind of an often ego. And I'm not downplaying the value.
No, that's all perfectly reasonable behavior to seek to have a better experience by doing those things well.
Right. And then there's the soul purpose, which
Mhm.
for me is meaningfully different.
Mhm.
May I say a little bit about what I mean?
Well, that's why I suggest going into the unconscious, is because the ego really isn't qualified to answer the question, what is my purpose?
Well, it's imprinted by society's structures and expectations and whatever you've adopted.
And usually the thing that is most purposeful for me, I fear and would not choose it off a list.
Right, my ego would say, no way.
Definitely not that.
Exactly. My purpose is to contribute to the poor and give up my life in service to whatever. My ego is going to
common fear. Yes.
I kind of like my house. I kind of like my car. I kind of like being able to go to the movies.
Yeah.
I don't want to live in Kenya, and sorry, Kenyans, I don't mean
you've articulated one of the fears that blocks people's purpose beautifully.
Yeah. So the soul, I think sometimes the soul screams and sometimes the soul whispers, but it's not all, because it's in the unconscious. It's not always clear. So
usually not clear.
In theory, I clear out my fear, but now I'm left with the question, what is my soul? So the soul for me is that unique expression of who I am in this life.
Hmm.
To put it rather simply,
And according to some belief systems, who I am in many lives.
well, I'm in many lives, but it is a unique imprint of my life versus divinity or connected to God might be something we all do. We all
Hmm.
when we give, it feels good. But what is my unique uh, life in a
Hmm.
sense? That I'd have to ask a different place than my ego. I'd have to ask my soul, assuming there's some place to ask. Is there a way I can find that in my unconscious? Is kind of my question.
Hmm.
Kind of my question.
Dreams is one way.
Yeah.
Meditation is another. Journaling is another. There are many ways to do it, but that creating of the fear-free container in which to seek to have that dialogue is the most important part,
That
because
makes
none of those other methods work
yeah.
without that clearing being made first, in my experience.
Yeah. I have this belief I've been holding on to, and I want to share it with you, that in some sense, the inklings of purpose have been in me for quite a while, that it sometimes shows up early on, but I
Well,
don't live.
it's normally the case that it leaves breadcrumbs.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I've been thinking.
and we actually have tests for, in the true purpose methodology, we test and see, well, is that really your purpose? We don't take the soul's word for it necessarily. So if it is your purpose, you should be able to see the breadcrumb trail, right?
Yeah.
And the way we ask the question is we say, okay, in theory, this is your purpose. Now we have a draft purpose because the person cleared their fears and they talked to their soul and then they got this purpose and they're asking themselves, well, how do I know this is correct?
Yeah.
And what we say is, okay, if it is correct, look back at your life, and what looked like a series of random events should now appear to be a carefully crafted training program.
Funny way of looking at it, but I
And
guess
if that's not true, it calls the accuracy of the purpose into question. And the people don't necessarily see it right away. They look back and they go, what? And then they go, oh,
yeah,
oh, oh my, oh, wow.
right.
And suddenly it's just sort of like the lens just came into focus and everything all lines up and they're like, that suddenly doesn't look random at all.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, good. That was your purpose.
Or you're in the ballpark. We're getting closer.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
no, if they have that experience, we're pretty much there. So, yeah,
Got it.
yeah,
Well, this. I would imagine we could spend days on how to find it, and the book is. I've read the book. I've followed some of the processes. Part of the reason why I didn't follow it all the way is because have the great fortune of being clear about my purpose for a long
yeah, yeah.
time.
You're a good example of that kind of person. I said, where if they're feeling pretty fulfilled, their appetite for purpose is reduced, right? They just need a snack, not an entree. You're one of those.
Yeah, but I wanted to see what you're up to, and I read the book with that in mind, and it fits a lot of what has been my direct experience. Mine was a bit of a lightning bolt.
Yeah,
It hit
mine
me
too.
in my late 20s, and I was ready to hear it,
Yeah,
and I did, and I've followed ever since. So,
took
almost
me longer.
well, doesn't mean I'm a better person, although I,
Definitely doesn't mean that.
no, no. So at any rate, darn, something's got to mean I'm a better person,
Yeah,
but
I'm sure there's other evidence.
yeah. So, back to men and
Yeah.
power, because
Hmm.
this is about men and power, and
Sure.
just about everything we've talked about probably sort of semi-universally applicable.
Absolutely. A little bit about the midlife crisis stuff might not fit exactly, but everything else universal.
Right. So men, to highlight one piece, men have difficulty finding purpose and living it because of the scripts that we've been living to be good providers.
And because all of us our psyches are designed in a way that doesn't make the purpose just naturally pop out, right? And occasionally it does, as it did with you in your late 20s, as it did with me at 41. But we're in the minority, Keith. Most people that does not occur to at all, ever.
Men
Um,
more than women?
uh, as in terms of just spontaneously finding their purpose, it's fairly rare.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm asking is for the men.
Yeah.
It's harder for men because of their script. I would imagine women have other scripts as well.
I don't think it's harder for men because of society's scripting. I think it's hard for everybody.
Okay. So now I want to talk about men.
Yeah.
What's unique about men that makes this journey toward purpose meaningful or important?
Mhm. Yeah, what's unique about men is that inherent need for purposeful work, right? That need to make something in my lifetime with my hands, literally or figuratively, that has some lasting impact on the world, that lives on beyond me,
Yeah.
right? There's a deep seated need for that.
Yeah.
And purpose isn't the only way to achieve that, but it's a really good one. And
Yeah.
the majority of men don't have a strategy for fulfilling that need.
Hmm.
And for those men, finding the purpose would be really wise. And let me say that finding the purpose, unfortunately, isn't enough. And you know this, Keith, that in addition to knowing what the purpose is, I also need skillful means
Yeah.
and commitment and resources and time and support and mentorship to make these things happen. And this is where it ties into power, which is the purpose itself is information. I also need the power and the ability to wield that power in a way that actually causes the purpose to come to fruition.
Yes.
And I've seen this interesting split among men where some men who've really spent much more time and energy developing their spiritual capabilities have an easier time finding their purpose and then struggle to manifest it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the men who go out in the world and make something happen, right? They start a company or they work their way up through the corporate ladder or they, go into the military and get promoted or something like that. They like make something of themselves against the odds,
Yeah.
have a terribly difficult time finding their purpose,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
are much more successful at manifesting it when they do.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense to me. I uh I remember reading a book 25 years ago called Vision and Will. It was a
Mm.
book about productive companies,
Hmm.
what makes them productive. And the combination of vision and will was a beautiful combination. It's
Speaking to exactly what I was just sharing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's vision. If you have a vision or purpose, but no capacity to manifest, you kind of live in the clouds and
Hmm.
you yeah. And then if you have able to manifest things, but no vision, no purpose, you manifest things, but it doesn't necessarily fulfill.
That's right. And interestingly, also the training that is offered to men and the support that is offered to men tends to skew along the same split. So I'm watching my son watch these red pill videos, and he's got this thing of this retired Navy SEAL who's run like 60 ultra marathons talking about commitment, right?
Yeah.
But there's no spirituality or purpose or any of that stuff in it. It's all just rah, manifest, 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 rah.
Yeah.
Um, and then you could get into these other things, and it's this super navel gazy crystal matrix stuff, which is just filled with spirituality and connection with larger forces and that kind of stuff, but not even a value for making something tangible in the physical material world,
Yeah.
right? And this was one of the things I love about our workshop, the Sword and Scepter, is that blending of those two worlds, which in my experience happens very rarely, which
Yeah.
is that honoring of the deep unconscious, the honoring of the larger forces, of the vision, of the purpose that calls us into the world, and what in my psyche is getting in the way of me powerfully expressing that thing in a way that has an impact and creates a lasting result.
Yeah.
And to cover that whole spectrum.
Yeah. Along the way, as I've been asking you, what is it about men? I've been thinking, well, lots of women I know want to find meaningful work
Mhm,
and live it. And their meaningful work is at home
mhm.
in partnership with or in service to their children and their family. And
Yeah,
that becomes, in some sense, their meaningful work.
sure. And,
So,
and and parents often report great experiences of fulfillment from raising children.
right, right, exactly. And so it strikes me that women, perhaps equally as men, finding purposeful work, purposeful life matters equally. But I still think that the men
The,
more
the the
often,
the women have chosen to go out and engage in the marketplace more than they used to. And I
absolutely,
think that having that option available is a blessing to society and to those women and everybody else, as is the option not to engage and to choose a different path, right? I'm all about the options personally.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be quite as hard coded for the women. And I could be completely wrong about that. I'm much more an expert on men than I am on women.
Yeah.
But it seems to be more of a choice for the women than it is for the men.
Yeah. That may be. What I was keying on as I was listening and thinking about this was the concept of the masculine. So
Mm-hmm.
the title of the series is Men, Power, and the Search for a Healthy Masculine.
Yep.
The masculine in us wants to produce,
Yep.
and in men or women.
That's right.
And so now the
But
man,
women expressing healthy masculine is a feature of our society now, as is
absolutely,
women expressing an unhealthy masculine.
and when they're imprinted with uh, a idea of expressing, being productive out there and creating something that may or may not be fulfilling from a soul perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it just struck me, we've talked about this before. The symbol of the man is a circle and an arrow. So
Mm-hmm.
the masculine wants to reach out into the
Go
world,
out to penetrate, to yep.
to create, to produce something, to manifest that which has not existed
Mm-hmm.
in some meaningful way in men or women. And so it seems to me if you're directed there, got to, but I don't have a sense of why that direction, why that work, why that, without a sense of purpose, I'm manifesting stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but it still may not be fulfilling unless
It may not be fulfilling to the extent that I and others don't see the stuff that I'm manifesting as particularly meaningful, impactful, or valuable.
right, right. And what I
And,
get,
and that's, by the way, that's a big complaint of men and women in big corporations, particularly in middle management, of people feeling that something like, I can't remember when this was study was done years ago, but something like 90% of them feeling like what they did every day made no difference.
yeah,
And that's a psychologically unhealthy state to be in. That is, over the long term, dangerous to be in
oh,
that state.
depression. It could, a lot of depression could be simply the lack of meaning in our lives, or lack of felt meaning.
Yep.
Um, uh, it's interesting. I suppose it's even possible to have a clear purpose and do the same work you've always done, but doing it with meaning and a sense of mission changes the hue of it, changes the experience of it. So I want to get to the sword and scepter. I want to get to,
Yeah.
in some sense, we're here to share with the world.
Yeah.
And in some sense, we're here to invite men who might be interested into this workshop experience.
Come into this realm and explore it and test your relationship with your power and your purpose and with other men.
What is your understanding of why we talk about purpose in the workshop in the Sword and Scepter, and why we even do the workshop? It's a service in some sense, our service.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as society evolves and as men's roles are further deconstructed, it removes that the thing I talked about earlier about in an indigenous society, the role is clear and there's a lot of inherent fulfillment in performing the role, right? So now the role is not clear. And to the extent it is, there isn't inherent fulfillment performing it. So now, as a man in our society, you have to make your own way. Not just make your own way in terms of deciding how to earn money and support yourself, and if you have one, a family, but also make your own way in terms of coming up with a strategy to lead a fulfilling and meaningful life that you and others will look back on with gratitude and pride at the end of, rather than feeling like, you know what, I'm about done and I'm not sure that it really made that much difference that I was here. And as we said, the relationship to purpose helps with guiding the way, showing the path. The relationship to power is critically important, or else nothing will happen with that purpose.
Yeah.
And not only that, But men who express their purpose effectively often find themselves in positions of leadership. And now your relationship to power has either a positive or a negative effect on a lot of people, and
Yeah,
possibly on the environment and other things as well.
that makes perfect sense to me. I want to offer it from a slightly different angle that just kind of adds to the palette of this question. Um, it seems to me that a lot of what the Sword and Scepter is about is finding oneself and being good with oneself, and in some sense finding one's sovereign self in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more I'm clear about who I am, the more I'm good with who I am, and the more I bring that to the world, the more, not just at the end of my life, but the experience of my life gets far more satisfying, far more rich, far more good. And so we're not just about helping men find their purpose, we're about helping them find themselves fully. And
Right.
purpose is an important feature of it.
Whose purpose am I manifesting exactly? Which version of myself?
So it's we choose these topics for a reason, not just for the workshop, but because we believe that the combination of these things that we're exploring in this series will be meaningful
Mm-hmm.
to creating a healthy, full life.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a long time since we've talked directly about these things.
Yeah, we talk
Uh,
around purpose all the time.
and it's hard to have a conversation with you without purpose somewhere coming around.
Leaking in.
Yeah, but I've appreciated your enthusiasm, which is quite apparent, in that it has something to do with your purpose, of course. But I've also appreciated um, it's a question. It's not an answer. It's a question. What is this journey that I'm on?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I make it a better life?
How do I make the most of it?
Yeah. So that it's right now it's good. And at the end of my life, I can smile and die with little or no regret.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
This was good.
Look forward to chatting again on other topics.
Oh, we will be chatting, no doubt. All right.